Going to jump in. So again, welcome everybody. It is great to have you here. James Davis, thanks for joining. This is our monthly best practices masterclass. And we started this process back in March. And our intent is really to create some community around Coachmetrix. We're excited about the product. We're excited about the process that it creates for coaches. And we want you to get to know each other because I think the potential that is here for us is to have a common coaching process, but still use all of our unique skills and abilities in a coach engagement. So, Adam, if you're looking for some other coaches to connect with, whether it's on these calls or within our Coachmetrix community, and you all have a common coaching process, boy, it'd be pretty awesome to be able to tap into this network of coaches and enhance your coaching engagements and bring other people in where you need that support or additional coaches. So that's our vision, that people get connected. So if there's someone that for some reason you're connecting with on these best practices masterclasses, reach out to them directly, and we're happy to help facilitate that. So thanks for being here today. And here's our roadmap for today's particular conversation. And the roadmap is really about how do you use Coachmetrix when working with teams, right? It's pretty straightforward when working with individual leaders, but we wanted to touch on this topic because we get a lot of questions, especially through our support channel. So we're going to talk about very quickly the 4 levels of measurement, but in the context of teams. We're going to talk about some different ways to think about structuring your engagements, your team engagements with Coachmetrix. We'll talk about how to leverage some of the features that Coachmetrix offers in a team engagement. And then, as always, throughout all of this, please jump in, interrupt. Let's get your ideas and your wisdom. I think, I'm going to tee up some topics here, but you all know more than I do.
I have a quick question.
Go for it, Frank.
Don't seem like your slides are changing.
Oh, they're not changing. Okay. Are they changing on your end, Robin? I am showing right now the roadmap for today screen.
No, mine says new to working from home.
Yeah, that's someone else's screen. Frank, you might have another screen that's open.
Oh, Lord, hope I don't.
I'm showing a PowerPoint that says roadmap for today. There's a big green arrow on the left-hand side.
That's what I'm seeing too.
Okay, other folks are seeing that too. Okay.
Okay, that's weird because, okay, I keep going. That's weird
right.
because I'm in the same webinar, but I got something different on the screen.
All right, I'm going to keep going then, Frank. So that's our roadmap, and jump in, folks, as you have used this product for a while, or maybe you're new to the product, or ideas or questions for the group around whether it's Coachmetrix or even things outside of Coachmetrix.
Hey, Sal.
Yes.
No, this is great. This is actually, I'm getting ready to do a team engagement at the beginning of December. So is this team, I know when we talked before, that using it as a team, you could use it as coaching, like create a team profile, but then have each individual in that. Can you now interconnect those? Is that available now? Or are we just talking about, like, when you say coaching a team, is it having each leader have their own profile, but you have that one program?
Yeah, so I'm gonna, so we haven't added any new features, James, from what you've seen, but I'm gonna lay out 4 different ideas on how you could use Coachmetrix with a team. So hold that question or that thought for about 2 minutes, maybe 1 minute. And I'm going to lay out 4 different options that I've seen on how to use the product with when you're working with a team. It could be an intact leadership team. That's primarily what we've got in mind here. And then let me know if I'm answering your questions when we get there.
Right. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. So for folks that haven't been on these best practices masterclasses, these are for Coachmetrix subscribers. And mark your calendar, December 11th is our next one. We're going to be talking about marketing strategies so that we can all set up our businesses for success in 2021. Hopefully that'll be really interactive session on things people are doing to grow their practice. Where'd Coachmetrix come from? Well, Coachmetrix came from the coaching that we've done over the last really 15 years, but we started to notice trends about 8 years ago. And some of the trends that we noticed, you probably heard my spiel on this before, is we noticed that we were running these long-term leadership development and coaching engagements, and many of the participants in those engagements, they either weren't creating an action plan to the extent possible, or an action plan that provided enough detail, transparency, accountability to really drive behavioral change. And we noticed that was happening with paper-based action plans. So that was the first thing that sparked this. And then we started to notice that fewer and fewer people were showing up to our workshops literally with pens. And there was this digital transformation that was starting to happen in the workplace, but the coaching field, the coaching industry wasn't keeping pace. I still think coaching in general is behind in this space. And then, of course, measurement. And I'll never forget, VP of HR in one of the engagements that we were running asked us, hey, how are we doing? And of course, I had all of this great smiley face data, you know, the typical survey data that we have as coaches, or coach satisfaction surveys, or and it's important information, but it didn't measure change. So that's where Coachmetrix came from. We started noticing these trends. We knew we needed a platform that could help us measure better, create accountability with action planning, and then also, of course, create a system to optimize communication around the coaching engagement. So what I want you to know is this is a platform that's been built by coaches. It's made for coaches, and we love feedback from our subscribers. And we can't promise that will build what you're asking for, but we promise we'll listen. So good, bad, tough feedback, great feedback, we love it all. It helps us really think about where this platform is going. And we have some fun new features that we'll be releasing in the next 15 to 45 days that we're excited about. So the backdrop here, we always go back to this, for folks that have more of an organizational development background, we tend to think about 4 levels of measurement. So we want to apply those same 4 levels of measurement when we're working with a team. And so, James, maybe to your question, when I think about the idea of a team, at least for this conversation today, we're thinking about an intact team. So it could be a leadership team. They work together. You've got a CEO, you've got his or her leaders that report directly in, and they function as a team. Or it could be a functional area of the business, and you're working with a team of any sort. So a group of people that you're working together that really function as a team. But when we think about measurement at a general level, and again, this is I'd say a modified version of how Kirkpatrick lays it out. Number 1, we've got program reactions. So these are your typical either coach evaluation, satisfaction surveys, or maybe they're a survey that happens after each of your workshops, or a quick plus delta. You're measuring the participants' reaction to the content and to the facilitator or coach. It's important information. It doesn't measure behavioral change, but it gives us information on how to maybe adjust. Level 2, we tend to think about self-assessment. Am I changing as a result of the coaching or the leadership that I'm going through? And so Coachmetrix handles level 2. There's a self-assessment aspect to the pulse surveys that go out. Level 3, this is really the sweet spot of Coachmetrix. Am I changing as a leader from the perspective of other people who are impacted by my behaviors? In Coachmetrix, we call them supporters. And then level 4 is really more organizational impact. And when we think about this as a team, it's really more, is the team collectively as a team of people changing? And so at this level, we can measure team change by a simple survey that goes out, and this is outside of Coachmetrix, but I still want to make sure you're measuring here. We typically will take a benchmark at the beginning of a team engagement, and then a progress report sometime along the way, maybe 6 months down the road, or 9 months, or 12 months, or maybe there's a series of progress reports. So this could happen through Coachmetrix. This could also happen through some other survey. So for example, we oftentimes will use tools like the 5 dysfunctions of a team, take a benchmark based on that survey, and do a progress report later in the engagement. So this is the backdrop. We're always thinking about how do we measure at all of these levels so that we can really drive individual change, collective change, and change the entire leadership system. Before I get into the specific ways in which you can use Coachmetrix on your engagements, let me just pause here really quickly for any comments or anything that might be interesting, or maybe you've got some questions. What's coming up for you right now?
Hey, Sal.
Yes. Hey,
Yeah,
Frank.
so, hi, how are you?
Good, thanks. Good to see you.
Good. You too. So the one thing that I've noticed, that maybe it's a level 5 change, but
Yeah.
culture change. So beyond teams, you've got the culture of the organization. And when we did that project, that pilot project last year with 24 coachees using Coachmetrix all at the same time, I didn't have any way of measuring it necessarily, except for a post-project survey, but I really felt like the culture of the whole business unit, the whole organization changed. Was, had 1,500 employees, but
Wow.
150 of them were touched by the program, when 24 coaches, each with, coachees, each with at least 3 unique supporters. So there's almost like a level of team impact, which is like what I'm really interested in, is the cultural changes of creating accountability and transparency, openness, things like that. So I don't know, just throwing that out there as an observation.
Yeah, I think that's brilliant. It makes a lot of sense to me, and I think, and we'll get into this here in a minute, Frank, but what if you identified some critical behaviors that were important to making that cultural change, and you started measuring those behaviors across all the leaders or all the teams in your program? So it's one of the options that I'm going to show here. So there is a direct connection. I love that thinking. And so, how can you create, let's add a level 5 to this model, right? Like, what if you put this in your proposals to your clients? What if you tell your clients, hey, listen, we measure with the same level of discipline that you measure anything else in the business. You'll completely set your business apart. We want Coachmetrix to be part of that solution. And so, for the cultural measurements, maybe there's some outside surveys you have. Maybe Coachmetrix starts to help you identify or measure the behaviors that lead to that cultural change and measurement. I think that's great. That makes a lot of sense to me. Any other reactions or thoughts on these 4 levels of measurement? All right, I'm going to keep going. And in this next section, I want to just maybe lay out 4 ways to think about your team engagement with Coachmetrix. And then I'm going to open it up for discussion. James, I think this will speak to what you were asking. If it doesn't, jump in, ask a question, and we'll get that answered. So option number 1, you've got a team. Let's say you've got a team of 8 executives. They're the leadership team for company X, Y, and Z. Option 1 is every leader on that team has their own individual goals that are probably unrelated. So the CEO's got his or her own set of goals. VP of Finance has their goals. The marketing director has their goals. And those goals could be generated from any number of ways. They could, maybe you're incorporating a 360 as part of your team engagement. In our team engagements, we often do peer feedback exercises where each member of a team is giving everybody else feedback, or maybe there's a feed forward exercise like what Marshall Goldsmith might go through that leads each member of the team to create their own goals. Sometimes we'll use Coachmetrix toward the end of a team engagement where every team member is now going to commit to something that they're going to work on at the end of an engagement, and then you want to measure those behaviors over time. this could look any number of ways, but the structure for this first idea here is every member of the team has their own individual goals that are focused on their development areas individually. Option number 2 is a bit about what I was just talking about, Frank, related to culture change. What if all of the members of the team had the same exact goals? So for example, maybe the team is working on just building more vulnerability-based trust on the team, or being less guarded, or engaging in productive conflict, whatever it is that the team's working on. What if everybody on that team had the same exact focus area? Now you could start measuring culture change, at least at the team level, and maybe it's in support of some bigger culture changes. We're working with a client right now, and they're really shifting their entire culture from what used to be top-down, fear-based, very reactive. If any of you use like the leadership circle profile, very controlling and protective environment. How do we boot that operating system up to more creative competencies? And so with leaders on a team like that, we could all have some specific goals that are the same for everybody on the team. And now we start measuring the same things across 6, 8, 10 people on that leadership team. So that's team structure number 2. Let me get through the last 2 options here, and then we'll open it up for discussion. Team structure number 3 is completely different, which is we now use Coachmetrix to measure the collective team goals. So maybe we're trying to get better as a team at those same, maybe some of the same things that I measured, but we're not measuring at the individual level, but we're measuring how are we doing as a team. And so you have to think about this a little bit differently. And in this case, the leader would be the participant and the supporters would be all of the team members. And so imagine this leadership team is sitting in a team meeting once a month, and maybe they're working on these things that I have listed here. We engage in productive dialogue. We hold each other accountable to meet our goals. We're unguarded in our interactions with each other. And the leader opens up Coachmetrix and clicks on the immediate pulse feedback request, real time, and sends out a survey to everybody on the team, who are the supporters, and the leader is the participant. And everyone takes 3 minutes in that team meeting, responds to it, and now we're showing Coachmetrix either on the Zoom call or we're showing Coachmetrix in the conference room. We're measuring at the collective level. It's a bit of a workaround because of some of the labeling that is happening in Coachmetrix. And I think eventually we'll be able to kind of fix that. But what we're doing here is we've got a project where the leader is the participant and the supporters are the team members. Option number 4 is what if you did both? So what if you chose from option 1 or 2, where everyone either has their own individual goals or everyone has the same exact goals, but we're measuring at the individual level. And then we also create a separate project, a second project, where we're measuring the collective goals. I love this one the best because you're helping change the individuals and you're helping change the entire team, the collective team, which ultimately means we're changing the system. So let's open this up for discussion. There's 4, and by the way, I might even be missing some options. We're always amazed at how people are using Coachmetrix. Let's open this up for questions, ideas, challenge, how we might use this. Maybe you've got some unique ways in which you're working with teams. Love to hear any discussion around this.
Hi, Sal. I'm working with teams and I'm using Coachmetrix only for teams, and I haven't thought about it actually to use it in this way. I first start with a question actually. I'm a bit confused between option 4 and 3. 4, I understand the leader is the participant. Who is the participant in option 3? Maybe I missed.
So let me just go back to those, Dave. Thanks for the question. So in option 3, we are focused on the collective group. So we've got the leader is the participant and the team members are the supporters. And what I like about this is sometimes our leaders have a different view of the world than the people that report into that person. So they're still going to get their own self perspective versus how the supporters think about the team. Option 4, you really have 2 separate projects. You have project number 1, which is we're measuring all of the individual behaviors. And then you've got a second project where we're measuring the collective. Does that make sense, Dave?
Yeah, actually, well, thank you so much. I never thought about it. I'm using the individuals, and by the way, when you use a project with the team members, you have one view how the progress that the whole team is making on the chart. So that's beautiful by itself. You can see if they're all moving upwards, or there's some moving upwards, some moving downwards, and so on, right? But I never thought about actually creating a project. Since you mentioned the leadership circle, I'm using the leadership circle as well before every project. And I'm using both the individual and I use they call it the collective, I forgot, the collective leadership assessment for the team.
Yeah.
So that means that when I go to Coachmetrix, I will actually mirror that. I will have the individual, I will have one project for the team that I can use both the team as a self-assessment and bring supporters from the board or from other stakeholders to kind of a pulse survey once a month to give them how are you doing with your shift that you're making.
Yes.
So that's pretty good actually. Never thought about it using two
Thanks,
projects.
Dave. And for folks that, I mean, we are agnostic in terms of the assessments that you use. Some of our coaches use just verbal assessments. Some have their own proprietary assessments. Some are using tools like the Leadership Circle. Leadership Circle is a 360 tool. It's a great tool. And yeah, it works really well, Dave, with both the individual 360s and then there's the collective 360 that basically aggregates that entire leadership team's data to see what the overall picture looks like. Nice. Other questions, thoughts? James, did one of these options answer your question?
No, yeah, it does. It's great. No, I think it's great to be able to measure the individual or the collective. And so that's what I was thinking about. So thank you.
Yeah. Great.
Sal, we were connected on email through email about when we work with teams, the administrative side that we need, since the team is there for every participant, we need to create again, enter the email and so on. That will really be helpful, especially when the team, for larger team, to simplify the administrative side of doing with teams. So that will really help to make it faster.
Yeah. And Dave, did you have specific feedback there on how to do that?
When previously?
No, in your comment, was there a feature or something that you're looking for or something you want to see adjusted about Coachmetrix?
So look, if we have a team of 8 people, so
Yeah.
we administrate it for the team. So that means that we need to go every time that once the team is created already, it's in the system. But as a supporter for every participant, I need to key in again and again the supporters that already in the system as a team member. So I think it'll be very
Yeah. I see. Yeah. There are definitely some aspects of Coachmetrix that we want to improve on. That's a great example. Other examples that you all probably know about are like when you send out a new participant welcome message, we don't currently save a template for you. That's on our list. There are some things, or batch loading individual participant names, things like that. We have some improvements to work on, definitely. That's great. Any other comments? Michelle, Annalise, James, Lori, Tony, Frank, anything else that I can answer in terms of how these 4 options might work? or even what your experience might have been. Let's go over to Tony. And Tony, you're on mute.
There I am.
Yep.
We actually did the option 2 just recently with one of our clients. We had about 8 people. They all had the same goals. They were all doing their self-assessments and pulse feedback, and they could see their own individual results. But in the meetings, they addressed the team as a whole, which was really nice. So no one was pulled out by not having their numbers go up, but as a team. And they liked it so much. We went through 3 rounds. They asked for 2 more, and we had it set up just in case they did that. So they were thrilled with the results. And Dave, just answer to your question, those administrative things. I'm the business manager for Change Fusion, and I get to do all of those things for the coach, and she can just do everything else. So that's how we solve that. I handle that part of it, and then she does all of the upfront work with the client.
Thanks, Tony. That's really helpful. Glad to hear that you're getting some really good results with that, and the team saw that as very helpful. And yeah, it's and the idea of having someone on your team, if you've got a business manager, or sometimes it's a VA, virtual assistant, sometimes it's a project manager, someone in that type of role to handle some of the administrative function of it can be really helpful.
So,
Great.
Tony, do you mind to elaborate? What does it mean that they have the same goal? How did it show up on Coachmetrix?
They met, they did research, they decided on what goals they wanted for the team, and there were 8 goals, which is a lot. But so when I entered the project in, I entered it in as each person having the same goals, and everyone in the team were participants and supporters. And so every time there was a self-assessment, everybody was rating each other and themselves as a self-assessment. And it was just fascinating to see the results from that. So it was a lot of fun, and we're going for 2 more.
So that was ad hoc during a team meeting or facilitation?
They're an ongoing client, and there were some trust issues, some negative feedback about each other. And so our president, Jill, came up with this idea to do this in Coachmetrix. And I'm like, sure. And then Robin knows that I asked her some questions. And so we got it all set up. And it was just, I was really impressed with it and how nicely it worked. And like I said, I entered all the dates, the feedback requests. All the participants had to do were just do their responses, offer the feedback. They didn't have to worry about anything else. And I'm a fan.
Mm-hmm.
That's great. I love that linkage, like right into the work that you're already doing with the client.
Oh, yeah.
Hey,
Awesome.
Saul.
Yeah. Hey, Frank. Yeah.
So this is very timely because I have this this client, after doing some 5 behaviors work with them,
Nice.
we came up with 6 statements that are behavioral statements that we're going to track for the next 90 days. Like ask a teammate for constructive feedback, ask a teammate for help or guidance on a task, stuff like that, right? And I'm just, as I'm hearing this conversation, I'm wondering if, maybe some dimension of option 3 would be a kind of elegant way to collect this. I mean, I'm not sure, I'm just thinking this out loud as we're reviewing this, but
Yep.
Maybe it would be the team leader would be the recipient, and the other 11 people would be the supporters, and you would get a ad hoc survey that Aaron would send out maybe before their monthly meeting. And then maybe there's 6 questions. I don't know, it'd be 1, 0, 1, or 2, if you did it more than once by each question. I don't know. I don't want it to be cumbersome for people, but at the moment we'd have no way to track it except maybe a spreadsheet, or I don't know.
Yeah. I think that's a great example of where you could use it. So you've got some clear behaviors that you're focused
Right.
on based on the 5 behaviors, 5
Right.
dysfunctions model.
Yep.
So, to some extent, the survey questions are already defined because they're in
Right.
the back of the book, right?
Yep.
And yeah, so set up a new project, put in your leader as the participant.
Mhm.
You're going to have 6 goals.
Mhm.
Each goal will have a behavioral statement that says something like, we are unguarded in our meetings. Number 1. Number 2, we actively ask each other for input in our areas of the business, whatever those questions are. But instead of that survey item being focused on the individual, like Frank does this and that, it's we, the leadership team.
Mm.
Yeah, and you could absolutely, if I think about, let me go into Coachmetrix here. Can you see my screen right now? I've got the PowerPoint on the left, Coachmetrix on the right. Okay,
Yep.
great. So when I just go into Greg Smithy's account, remember you've got underneath pulse feedback, you've got this immediate feedback function.
Right.
Instead of automating it, you or your business manager could go in 3 days before you're working with this team collectively and just kick off the pulse feedback round.
Mm-hmm.
You could certainly schedule it too, or you could do it right in the middle of the meeting. So yeah, I think that would be a great example of how you could measure at the collective level, Frank.
Yeah, because the idea was, since our last team meeting, I had the opportunity to ... So we were initially thinking of this as
That's
individual members of the team,
great. Right.
asking for help on a project, providing, a shout out, whatever it is. So I hadn't thought of working at kind of at the collective level.
Yeah.
And I don't know if doing that might pull it away from the individual responsibility of people. And that's, so I'm just sort of thinking about kind of balancing that out as well.
Yeah.
But it's interesting. I mean, I think I could do it either way.
And then, option 4 is you can do both. Now there's always the,
Right.
are we over surveying people, but you could think in terms of maybe measuring each individual team member every 30 or 45 days, and then maybe every 60 days or 90 days measuring at the team level.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, it's really good to think about. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Good. Any other ways in which you're using Coachmetrix with teams? It's really helpful, I think, to hear other people share their experiences and think about new ways of working.
Frank, I think you brought up a good idea. When I'm thinking about the culture shift in organizations, one of the organizations that I'm preparing a workshop with to work with for the next 9 months at the leadership level is they're worried about the staff seeing them make changes. And so using this from, wider perspective to, shoot out to the director levels to kind of measurement will show that they're taking it seriously and what behaviors they're measuring. I'm just thinking out loud a little bit. So this is really helpful for me to think about, like, how do we show the organization that the leaders are engaged in wanting to shift, and without and then noticing maybe it can then transpire into once I, how am I showing up now as a director? I'm expecting that from the executive team, but how am I now like showing up as a director? So no, this is good. Thank you.
Yeah, one other idea that came up for me, we haven't done this yet, but what if there's an annual engagement survey that goes out to an organization? And, oftentimes organizations have those engagement or culture surveys that go out, and they're often perceived as management's flavor of the month because maybe they report out on the results, but maybe don't do anything about it. But what if there were 2 or 3 leadership behaviors that came out of that engagement survey, and then we measured those behaviors over time through Coachmetrix? It could be another way to get to the cultural aspect, the level 5 that you mentioned earlier, Frank.
Yeah, Sal, this is Laura Schwartz. That's exactly what I was thinking. That, I mean, this is that time of year, and every year the same thing comes up. We have a plan, but the organization is very skeptical. And to be able to present this at this get-go as part of the assignment for the ongoing work, I think is just tremendous.
Yeah, that's great, Laura. And sometimes those surveys will break down the data by each of the functional areas of the business. So maybe maybe manager A in whatever department needs to work on something different based on the data than somebody else in a different department. So again, they could have their own set of leadership behaviors that you measure as a follow-on to an engagement survey. And it's a great business idea or as a value-added service to provide for your clients. Awesome.
Can I have a question about some recommendation about the first survey? I messed up last week because I sent the first one and people felt uncomfortable because people haven't started to make the goals that they just decided on the goals, and then they sent it, and I didn't send a clarification. This is kind of a baseline. So I just wonder how other people dealing with the first run, which is kind of a baseline. They don't suppose to make any changes yet. They just announced the goal, right? So I'm very curious what type of explanation you give them how to do the first round.
Anyone have any thoughts? I'll take a stab at it too, but love to hear how other folks are dealing with that. So your first survey goes out, what are people really measuring? Is it a baseline? Is it a follow-up to something else? What's your experience been?
I can hop in. I'm Annalise. I think with that first, it sounds like it's all about the pre-frame with that initial contact, and that we can rely on the platform to do that. But I think it's also probably the most necessary in our communication as the coach or whoever's leading the engagement to really set that frame for them, and to also probably invite them into verbal conversations with people who will be receiving that. And I know for me, when I'm in the water of my work and just okay, we got to set out that survey, this comes next. When there's that dissonance, I go back to okay, did I miss it? Did I miss a pre-frame on this experience for them? And that can help to really, at least for me in my work, to understand where there's some resistance. And so then we just go back and we reframe it oh yeah, understand that there's a misunderstanding here. This is just your baseline. So I think that's also being really clear in the setup of of how we're going to use the platform. That's at least how I'm engaging with it on my side.
Thanks, Annalise. I think that's really helpful. And one idea is in Coachmetrix, create a resource that is, so for example, we have a resource that we've created that is, it's called How to Enroll Your Supporters. And there's just some text in there that we can send to each of our participants when they're getting ready to enroll their supporters. So they're enrolling their supporters verbally, having that verbal conversation before they actually add them into Coachmetrix. So that pre-frame that you talked about, Annalise, if part of the messaging needs to come from the participant to his or her supporters, create a simple resource that gives them the words to use for that pre-frame. My thinking goes to anything that's repeatable in a coaching engagement, how do we just leverage that repeatability through Coachmetrix? So some of that pre-frame comes from the coach, but some of the pre-frame also might come from the participant. Any other, go ahead, James.
So regarding peer feedback, are you, any of the coaches on this call, are you using the Coachmetrix for the peer feedback too? And then, or are you using a different survey technique or tool?
What do you mean, James? But
prior to an engagement, kind of a needs assessment with the team, using some questions from the 5 dysfunctions to get feedback on each other, right? I'm looking at a psychological safety assessment to using with the team prior, even before trust is on, which is part of trust. But would you use that, or or would you use a Survey Monkey type tool? Is what I'm thinking.
Good question. Good question. So are you using Coachmetrix for that initial baseline as the assessment platform, or something external?
Yeah. I don't use Coachmetrix for baseline. I use DISC or 5 behaviors powered by Everything DISC because of the depth that provides. But then I use Coachmetrix after that because it's the only way to really measure behavioral change, which is the ultimate, sort of basically or ultimate method of measuring success in coaching, like someone's behavior changes or not, right? So yeah, that's how I do it.
Yeah, and that's similar to what we do as well, Frank. And James, one idea might be if you were going to use Coachmetrix for the baseline, if it's a baseline about how the whole team is doing, you could create a separate project like the option 3 that I laid out, where you're measuring the team, and then a second project where you're measuring each of the individuals ongoing. But what we do in our practice is, and part of the reason why I showed this slide was we are using an outside assessment for that baseline. And so that baseline then becomes this level 4 measurement, because we're taking a baseline of the collective team at the beginning of the engagement. Frank, in this case, if we're using 5 behaviors, and then 6 months later, we're running a progress report, which measures against that initial baseline. So to me, that's kind of this level 4 measurement.
Okay. No, thank you.
Awesome. I want to show a few more slides. Again, feel free to jump in. There's some other features in Coachmetrix. You may or may not be aware of some of these, and I just want to show you how we're using some of these for team engagements. The first one is, again, on the topic of repeatability. Anytime you do the same thing on most of your engagements, my mind, and this is probably just the way I think, my mind goes to, how do I just make this repeatable? So for example, a welcome kit as a resource. We put a sample welcome kit in everyone's account for individual coaching, but what if you had a welcome kit for a team? And the welcome kit, again, could include coaching agreements. It could include a video that you create. It could include the initial fieldwork assignment. I think the sky's the limit, but if you're doing something that's repeatable at the beginning of a team engagement, why not create a resource for it? Another idea around resources, James, you just mentioned psychological safety. Maybe there's a great TED Talk by Amy Edmondson or something that you're going to use to just provide some value add, or maybe there's an article or any kind of tools that you might already be providing and you're sending out over email. Create a resource for it so you can use it and repurpose it across all of your projects. And then the other thing too is if it's more of a like maybe you're doing some team training, some workshops with your groups, why not create a collection for each of your workshops? So I'll give you an example with Greg Smithy here. Maybe there's a workshop packet for workshop number 1, and inside that packet there's a pre-message. It's already written, it's already done, so people know what they should be thinking about before the workshop. Maybe there's a tool that you're going to refer to during the workshop or after the workshop. Maybe there's the video. By the way, Robin, if you're looking at this, this is the same issue that someone reported with the multiple videos showing up. But maybe there's a video on the topic that you're talking about. And then maybe there's the post-work assignment. So your collection becomes a packet for each of the workshops that you're running. And, you know, if you're running similar workshops across multiple teams or multiple engagements, it's another way to make your work repeatable or more easily repeatable. A couple of other ideas. Remember, you can share the action plan. So if you've got individual team members with their goals, they can share their action plan with other members of the team. Part of the methodology behind all of this madness is, you know, some of the stakeholder-centered principles, which is 1, get clear on what you're working on. Number 2, go public with what you're working on, and then follow up. So once those goals are in the system, there's the share action plan feature. And if there's already supporters in the system, you can share that action plan with your supporters or anybody else you choose to. So that might be one way to go public with that action plan. Couple of other tips, integrate feed forward. So as that feedback starts coming in, right, we're getting all these feed forward comments. If there's something that is a good idea for focus for the next 30 days, go back into your action plan. You probably don't want to update the goal statement or the behavioral statement, but you might update your action item with something new for the next 30 days. So make the connection for your participants between the data that's coming in and the action plan that they're focused on over the next 30 days. Another action planning tip, remember you can have different supporters for different goals. So if different people are impacted by that leader's behaviors, you don't have to just default to everybody else on the team. You might have different supporters for different goals. The only trick to remember here is when you add supporters into Coachmetrix, they automatically get assigned to every single goal. So you'll have to go into your goal, edit the goal, and uncheck the supporters that you don't want to be part of that survey. I'll go through a couple more tips and then I'll open it up for questions. Remember that you can use the tiles for a quick scan. If you're looking at this team, I can sort of quickly look at and say, okay, Coach Jim is coaching Greg and his last round of pulse feedback went out on January 1st and he's got 2 assignments and 3 goals. So we've added more data to these tiles so you can do a little bit more quick scanning on what's happening on the project. Pulse feedback, just remember you can go in and change your settings at the project level. This project settings are up here in the upper right. So once that pulse feedback starts to go out, your scale is locked and you can't change the privacy settings, but you can change the number of pulse feedback rounds. So just always be aware before that pulse feedback goes out of what your settings are. Align your scale. Sometimes you might align that scale to a 360. You can use a negative to a positive scale or a more traditional 1 to 5, 1 to 10, 1 to 100 scale. Optimize the frequency. We're always trying to balance not over surveying people, but getting the survey data out enough so that it's helpful and informative. Tip number 4, remember it's about the people and it's about the conversations much more so than it is about Coachmetrix. So we encourage people to have conversations with their supporters in between those pulse feedback rounds to remind them that they're thankful for the feedback that they're getting and to have the conversation. Hey, how have I done in the last 30 days? What can I do? What's your feed forward for the next 30 days? And it keeps those supporters engaged and reminds those supporters that the leader's still working on those behaviors. So we're changing both behavior and perception. Perception, in my mind, is harder to change than behavior. Couple more tips here. Check out the recent activity. So when you're looking at anybody's pulse feedback, we often get a question, how many people have responded to the pulse feedback? If you're on the pulse feedback page, there's this little section in here that will give you a status. It'll tell you when the last round went out and how many total surveys were submitted. It's a helpful little tip that sometimes is easy to miss. Tip number 6, remember to coach to the gap, right? There's the self-assessment And then there's other people's, the supporters assessment. Sometimes it's helpful to open that up in an individual coaching engagement, or if you're measuring the collective team, the leader score is going to show up here. The team member scores will show up as the participants. So that gap is often can lead to a helpful conversation. And there's a feature, I don't usually like to tell you what features are coming because sometimes we overpromise, but we do want to let you know that in the next 30 days, we're working on this right now, the ability to send a discussion to multiple people at one time. So this is going to be especially helpful on team engagements. Like, think about sending notes after team engagement instead of having to do that 8 times. If you've got 8 people on a team, you'll be able to send that discussion out to multiple people at a time. And if you start combining that with building templates ahead of time. So Frank, back to the 5 dysfunctions, what if you had a discussion template that was just a reminder about some of the concepts around trust? And then you built another template around conflict, another template around commitment, accountability, and results. You build all those into Coachmetrix. Remember, you've got this template feature over here on the left-hand side. And then when you go to create those discussions, you can pull from a template that's already been built, and it pre-populates the discussion and then schedule it for some time in the future. So at the beginning of that engagement, if you know when your workshops are scheduled, you can get all these reminders scheduled in advance to really nurture your existing clients. Or maybe it's the end of an engagement and you just want to send people some nudge reminders. Build those templates, schedule them to go out in advance, and it may end up helping you extend your coaching engagement or stay in touch with your client in a way that adds value that could create some conversations in the future. So those are some of the tips that we had on how Coachmetrix might administratively help you in team engagements. Sorry to speak for so long there, but I just wanted to get some of those tips on the table. What are your questions, reactions, or thoughts, or maybe how are you using some of the Coachmetrix features to support your team engagements?
This is Frank. I have a quick question. These sessions are great. Is there a place where we can go back and review prior sessions so we can, we're getting old about a day and our memory is not as good as it used to be? So is there a way we can go back and look at past sessions?
Absolutely, Frank. So when you're inside of Coachmetrix, there's a link up top here. It says community. And this community page is for Coachmetrix subscribers. We're going to be building this out more in the future. But on that community page, you'll see all of the previous Masterclass recordings. So you can go back and listen to any of these. We'll post this recording probably on Monday here in a couple of days. But there's also some sales support resources for you, some delivery support resources. There's more information about our partner program. So if you refer people to Coachmetrix, we reward you for that in discounts on your own fees. And it's kind of in the pilot place right now, but we'll be building that out over time. But this page is your page as subscribers, and all of these master classes are recorded and posted there.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, absolutely, Frank. Thanks for the question. Other questions or thoughts on how maybe you're using some of those features on your team engagements?
I love the comment of Annalise about using the verbal communication to complement. I think that I let too much count on the system, and so thank you, Annalise. You just drive these conversations between people, and what you said, it's all about thank you for the feedback. It's a gift, right? So
Yeah,
that's my takeaway. I'm curious, are you using it anonymously or not, most of you? I'm just curious how they use it.
great questions. Yeah, is your feedback anonymous or is it open where people know who the feedback's coming from? The default is the anonymous setting, so you would have to change it. Dave, my experience has been, after we've worked with a client, we usually start with the anonymous. But when we work with a client for a long period of time and the culture gets more and more healthy, we actually switch over to the open so that people know where it's coming. We don't start there. And again, you know, to Annalise's point, like, how are you pre-framing it? We also don't want to surprise people. But we ultimately, I think in the healthiest organizations, people can be really open about their feedback and feed forward. Love to hear if anyone else has a different point of view on that. Confidentiality is always a big topic in coaching. So I wouldn't be surprised if people have different viewpoints on that.
I've just seen that there's a fatigue around the anonymous feedback. I think that we're seeing it not just in a professional, but in a cultural and social moment. And I think that there's a tension between giving the time to build rapport and trust, and then also there being a readiness I'm seeing with clients for like, let's start getting more honest, like let's start owning our feedback. But I think that there's few organizations that I see when they initially come into an engagement that are healthy enough to honestly just to be able to bear that. Like it's just too heavy at the beginning. So we need that time to kind of fortify the system and get them healthier, kind of like giving them their vitamins, like making sure that they're healthy enough to be able to withstand that stressor. So I think it's really, Sal, what you said is spot on, is that it can be really nice to see them evolve into that. But I rarely go into it with the assumption that they could have that capacity initially.
Thanks, Annalise. That's really helpful. Yeah, that sounds in line with our thinking, and so thanks for that. And if other folks have different viewpoints on that or anything else that we've talked about, feel free to email me directly at Coachmetrix, and I'm happy to share the feedback that maybe you didn't get a chance to share today out in an email to you all as well. So. Well, folks, thank you so much. It's really always such a pleasure and honor to be in this conversation with you. Thank you for being Coachmetrix subscribers. We're grateful for that. And again, we're always open and want to listen to what your feedback is. Help us make this platform a platform that really serves coaches and ultimately helps us make a bigger impact in this world. Join us in December. We're going to talk about sales and marketing. It'll probably be less about Coachmetrix, more about sales and marketing, so we can set up our 2021 for success. Great to see everybody. Happy Friday, and hope you have a good weekend.
I have a great one. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody.